Cyprus has just introduced what is almost certainly the fastest pathway to EU citizenship currently available. Just 4 years of residency, and once you apply, your citizenship application is processed in 8 months. That deadline is written into law, and so far, the authorities are sticking to it. In this video, I'm joined by Bogdan Danchuk from Easily Global, who specializes in helping entrepreneurs structure their residency and business setup in Cyprus to access this accelerated pathway. We're going to walk through exactly how it works, who it's for, what it costs, and what the catches are. And if you want to find out whether you're eligible, Bogdan's offering a free 15-minute call for digital emigre viewers. Links in the description. Okay, let's get into it. Hey, Bogdan, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Fantastic. Hi from Prague.
So we've got this exciting naturalization timeline in Cyprus as potentially the shortest one in the EU and with much more tightly regulated processing timeline versus some others. So I think we'd like to kick off by setting the scene, walking us through the key aspects of Cyprus, the naturalization, and the different ways that people can get started with that.
Right. So just a few words about this particular pathway. That's quite a new pathway introduced very recently and already becoming probably one of the most popular ways people choose to have their Cyprus naturalization pathway go through. The reason being is that normally Cyprus didn't only have a very long pathway to naturalization in terms of time required before application, but also the processing time could be, just like in many other European countries, by the way. We know that from Portugal, from Greece, from other locations where processing time can sometimes be even longer than the actual required time to stay in a country before applying. So that used to be the case in Cyprus as well, with some cases going as long as 4, even 5 years. And this particular pathway is the only one which limits the processing time to exactly 8 months. So that's extremely appealing. It's probably one of the only countries in Europe, in the EU specifically, that does that. The other country I can think of which has a reasonable time to process naturalization applications is the UK, but since they're not a part of the EU anymore, unfortunately, probably Cyprus is the fastest one at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a legal 8-month processing requirement. And in your experience, do the authorities stick to that? I mean, that really is 8 months.
They absolutely do. At least for now, we see very consistent adherence to that guideline, and 8 months is definitely the max I've seen a process take. One thing to kind of consider when you go through that pathway is that people could confuse a few different migration options into Cyprus and think that they could overlap with this new procedure, which basically is aimed at skilled migrants. So one thing to take into consideration, that a lot of hyped up pathways to immigrate to Cyprus, such as the digital nomad visa, which pops pretty much at every jurisdiction we work with in Portugal, in other countries, does not actually entail that short period of naturalization options. Also, when it comes to the very popular residency, permanent residency by investment, which is a fantastic option in its own right, unfortunately, that one doesn't have the same pathway either. So essentially, it doesn't allow you to become an employee, a worker, which is required to benefit from that short pathway.
Okay, so if somebody is coming at this from citizenship is their primary goal above all else, can you walk us through in simple steps what they would need to do to access that via Cyprus?
So there are really two options to go about it. The first one is you really want to find a startup, a company, an employer in Cyprus that will indeed hire you, and that's going to be your career path. There are some requirements such as a minimum salary that has to be 2,500 euros, etc., to qualify as a skilled migrant. So that is kind of the obvious one. The less obvious one is starting up your own company that then employs you. Now, there are quite a few challenges with that has to be considered. Otherwise, you can't really get that permit through. So a new company that was established, let's say, a week ago and has nothing on its balance will unlikely get you that work permit, which is required to then be on that pathway to citizenship.
Okay, so that seems like a big catch for me when I was looking into this originally, when I first heard about it. Okay, it seems almost too easy, right? You just hire yourself through your own company and then problem solved. But of course, that's way too easy. So I know you mentioned in our warm up that there's something people can do to get past this, and can you walk through that in a bit more detail?
Right. So from our experience, what the authorities want to see is some level of investment into the company before it can be eligible to actually employ you or other people and then allow them for that pathway for naturalization. So the amount the authorities would normally be very comfortable with is around 200,000 euros of investment made again into your own company under your own company's bank account. That's not funds that go anywhere else. You keep them, but those have to serve as some kind of an investment that you're willing to make into Cyprus before you start the process.
Makes sense. And can you use those funds to pay yourself dividends, or does that have to be held in the company for a long period of time?
There is no regulation that makes you keep that in the company after the residence permit has been issued. And one of the easiest way to go about it would be to just use those funds to actually pay your salary, which you're supposed to, for that permit to stay and not be canceled.
Okay, makes sense. So it's pretty clean and straightforward once you've got that 200K in your Cypriot business bank account, right? Is that what they want to see? Okay, makes sense. You mentioned that there's another option that people could take. Can you walk us through that one as well?
So that really is about deciding whether your aim is the citizenship as fast as possible, having a residency permit in the EU, which potentially gives you access to the rest of the EU, and with Cyprus anticipating its entry accession to the Schengen zone within 2027, access to that broader area as well. Or you simply love Cyprus and you would like to live there. So in each of these options, you would probably choose a different migration program. So the most, I would say, complex one is the one that actually leads to citizenship the fastest. And we didn't even speak about the other requirements, such as the language test. But of course. So in essence, you will have to have an employer. You will have to pay yourself a salary that's higher than average. You will have to show education in certain backgrounds, or at least background that's sufficient to prove that you're highly skilled. And in that sense, that would be the pathway that's probably the most expensive to facilitate, but it also gives you the citizenship early. The other pathway, if you don't really want to have that, maybe you have a very good passport, maybe you're an American, you don't care about that access to the rest of the potential Schengen zone or having a permanent residency, you can simply go with a digital nomad visa, live happily in Cyprus. That will probably cost you the least. And of course, having a residency by investment, which again prevents you from working in Cyprus, but at the same time is extremely fast to get. It's permanent, and you will only have to invest 300,000 euros into real estate, which you yourself own. Again, when it comes to that type of permit, I usually say if you only buy the property for the purpose of having that residency permit, you should probably look at something under 130 square meters, because then the purchase tax on that property will be 5% instead of 19%, which is usually the case for bigger properties.
Yeah, that's a really important insider tip, because I imagine people just going into this by themselves would probably not know that. So, yeah. And would you say this 300K property route with permanent residency, is that a good fit more for like retirees or people who don't need to work? Are they allowed to receive passive income to support themselves while on this one?
Yes, they absolutely are allowed to receive any kind of passive income. I think the difference really is about time spent in Cyprus. If you don't anticipate staying in Cyprus long enough, since the digital nomad visa, for example, is kind of looked at as a short-term temporary residency, which either way is going to be renewed once a year. And the other pathway, which leads to citizenship, entails that you actually spend at least 120 days in Cyprus to show that you actually work, you actually perform some labor on the island, which requires that kind of a permit. If you spend especially less than 90 days per year. In Cyprus, your work permit might be canceled because simply not showing enough need for a permit to be there in the first place. So,
Makes sense. Yeah, but 120 days minimum is still quite low compared to Portugal or others where it's 183, right? Basically full time.
In that sense, we're not even talking about tax residency, where in Cyprus you can get away with 60 days per year to keep your tax residency in Cyprus. In that regard, we're actually talking about keeping your residency permit, your work permit active. If the government or the authorities notice that you're not really utilizing that permit, it might get canceled. For people who actually want to have that access and not fear of it being revoked for not spending the sufficient time, they could go the residency by investment route, invest in a property, and basically have that permanent residency regardless of how long they stay.
Okay. So important question. I think that, people want to know as a basic here. Realistically speaking, if somebody was looking at Cyprus for second citizenship, if they started, next month, how much time is it to actually have the passport in their hand, considering all the different parts that go into that process?
So I would say the immigration process really depends on whether or not you are looking into opening your own company to hire yourself. Opening a company in Cyprus, surprisingly, is actually quite a long process. A lot of people associate Cyprus with this tax evasion or easy pathway for company opening jurisdiction, which used to be the case, but we even see on the tax side of things that recently, at the beginning of this year, the corporate income tax have been raised from 12.5% to 15%. So Cyprus tries really hard to paint itself a different sort of pictures, a different image. In that sense, it might take about half a year to have everything done. Opening a company, securing a bank account for it, ensuring the funds enter properly, having the residence permit issued. So we're looking at a timeline which is not immediate. If, on the other hand, you have an employer that is already having an established company, is willing to employ you, that can be as short as 2 months.
Okay. And once everything is established and it can issue the work permit, is that when the citizenship clock would start counting?
Absolutely. So from the day you arrive with your newly issued residence permit, you are essentially on that time to get that 4 years or 5 years in case you're actually learning the language, but to a lesser extent. So we will talk about the language requirement in a bit. But yes, that's when the clock starts ticking.
That leads quite neatly into the next section about the language, because obviously that is not an insignificant factor. It's Greek. It's not, it's not easy. I actually did ancient Greek at school briefly, and it was not a happy time for me.
Indeed.
So for citizenship of Cyprus, you have to speak some Greek, right? And it's just the difference is the levels which you have to achieve on the Common European Framework for Languages. And the higher the level you can reach, the shorter the timeline can be, right? So can you walk us through the specifics of that?
Exactly. So basically there are 2 levels, and it's A2 or B1. So if you're willing to learn Greek to a B1 level, now, again, of course, it's a beautiful language, but it's a hard language. And if you're willing to learn it to a B1 level, the process as a total goes to 4 years of total residency in Cyprus, plus the 8 months that's usually taking maybe 6, 7 in practice to actually receive the citizenship. With A2, it's just extending by 1 year. So 5 years plus 8 months.
Okay. Again, not really that bad.
It's not that bad. One thing to keep in mind, though, and it's a technical practicality, those tests are conducted twice a year. So if you miss that kind of a deadline and you need it to happen a bit later, or if you are not sure about you passing that kind of test, be mindful of the timeline. Your 3rd year of residency when you're starting to pick up the language, because you might not actually make it in time for the test, and your timeline of receiving the citizenship might actually not work out.
Yeah, that's really important. It's been an issue in Portugal as well, because getting slots for the exam, it's very oversubscribed for the A2, so people have struggled with that, and sometimes they have to wait even another year to get a slot. So
at the moment, that's not an issue in Cyprus. You can get slots quite easily. It's just about having to wait another 6 months in case you did not make it this time. Of
Yeah.
course, there's also the civil test about Cyprus, about its history, about its culture. So that's naturally happening in many, many countries that you have to pass an extra test
Yeah.
plus to the language one.
And how does that work with the language levels? That test is it all in Greek, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So
the difference between the different levels is really your ability to either express yourself or communicate with others. So expressing an argument, going back and forth. So the schools that prepare you for that kind of a test will actually give you real life imitations of it before you can actually pass the real one.
so is the language test and the civics test part of the same thing?
No, they're separate.
They're separate. Okay. My worry would be like if somebody was going for A2, would they be good enough at Greek to be able to pass the civics test as well? That might be something to think about.
That would not be a concern, usually.
You told me, I think, that you know a few people who are going through this at the moment or have been through it, and they're going in with like language learning from the very beginning, right? Like that's how you have to go
I
at
think
it.
especially people who have weaker passports are really jumping on that opportunity. It can be really any passport that doesn't have the ease of travel that EU passports have. When it comes to Americans or Brits, I think maybe the motivation to get a passport is not as strong.
Yeah, I think it depends. Well, after Brexit, I was super motivated.
I'm happy to see that, of course, but I definitely see people from Ukraine, from Russia, from North Africa, from other Asian parts of the world that are really coming in to specifically go through that pathway and do it fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure. I think, so somebody was considering this now and they hadn't started any prep, they're starting from scratch. So they're just looking around like what EU second citizenship options would be fastest and most potentially most straightforward. And then they land upon this option for Cyprus. And this is clearly the fastest option now, right, with all things considered. So really, they need to go in from day one with a plan to just go all in on Greek. Like you can't just be lazy at the beginning. You've got to go in with a mission, and I think that's the way to get through this.
It's fast, and more importantly, it's realistic and predictable. I think one of the things that we really miss in many of the other naturalization processes in other countries is how unpredictable they are. If we're looking at Portugal with laws changing, if we're looking at countries like Greece where naturalization processes reach the post-application procedure and are idle for 5, 6, 7 years. And if we look at countries like Switzerland, where you have to go through a bunch of other approvals, such as your neighbors approving your character, and all of these are quite unpredictable, I think Cyprus is interesting from its predictability standpoint. Now, when it comes to this particular pathway, it is so new that we only started seeing people begin that journey. So this is actually something that has not ever existed. So it's quite unique in that 8-month processing, short timeline of residency, and the predictability that is ensured by quite a new law, which I'm not anticipating to be changed anytime soon.
So really, this is a great time if you want to go for it. If people are thinking about it, then really this is probably the best time, right? Now this is fresh and new, and it's not got politically, a hot potato quite yet.
Absolutely. And
Portugal
so
used
far,
to
it seems this law has met zero resistance from anyone locally, and people locally in Cyprus are actually, adopting it happily.
Could you walk us through, or give us a bit more information about your experience working with clients on this pathway? Like, have you seen anyone into the pathway yet, and how are they getting on, if so?
Most of the people we have met on this pathway have been people from the post-Soviet bloc. So again, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. Many of them have already lived in Cyprus. And what they did has been basically change the pathway that they were on from the original one to a highly skilled one, to benefit from that new time frame, benefit from that predictability of application. When it comes to Cyprus generally, before the introduction of this route, it was very popular for the tax aspect of it, and the immigration part actually came later. Back in the day, it was also very popular for the citizenship by investment route. Of course, that is long gone. And as we all know, the last person they have onboarded was actually one of the founders of Google. And then
I didn't actually know that.
Yeah.
So, I guess it's too early days, right, to have any case studies from somebody who's actually completed it because there's just not enough time elapsed yet.
Mostly, yes. I see people starting their journey. I didn't see many people having it done. So it's kind of very, very new early on. And at the same time, I do see many people actively studying Greek. So for a year, for 2 years, I see that happening. Yes. So that's definitely the part at which I see most of the interest.
Interesting. And how about the first stage of getting employed by your own company, getting that money in and getting that work permit? Have you seen successful examples of that early phase yet?
Absolutely. As I said, opening a company in Cyprus, it takes a while. The closer are in proximity to the island and you can facilitate all of that paperwork, the faster it goes. Better in the sense of sanctions. Citizenship that you have, the easier it will be for you to open a bank account if you are a person from a country which is naturally not having that kind of an approach by banks where they actually try to lure you in. Opening a bank account might also take a while. I'll give a practical example. So if you're from a country which is going to be accepted by one of the European neobanks, for example, you're a Brit, and Revolut would open an account for a Cyprus company. But if you're from a country like Russia or Iran, of course, it will be much more challenging for you to open that bank account that will allow you to actually get all the other steps in that allow you to become a resident. So in some cases, you would actually go through some extra steps to ensure that you're an EU resident before having the ability to open the bank account that then allows you to transfer the funds, that allow you to apply for the Cyprus one, that eventually result in a Cypriot work permit. So a lot of hoops to jump through. Again, if we're talking about Americans, Brits, Canadians, that's quite easy, quite fast. We're looking at a timeline of up to 6 months. When I work with people from a bit more scrutinized jurisdictions, sometimes that takes a while.
Okay. So for the average US or UK citizen who's interested in this, do you recommend them coming into Cyprus, being prepared to spend a couple of months in Cyprus at the beginning of that process to make things easier? It seems like it's better to be on the ground to manage these processes.
It could be, but it's not necessary. If they're able to deliver documents signed back and forth fast enough, I mean, they might be in Portugal for the time being. They might be in Greece for the time being. So being physically in Cyprus is really only necessary for that initial paperwork. And if they don't want to bother, it's not a big deal, especially if you live in Europe. When it comes to the US, sending paperwork back and forth, that can be a bit challenging, yes.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. So let's jump into a bit of a discussion about the taxes in Cyprus. I've heard some interesting headline numbers. It's not quite as good as it used to be, I think. Corporate tax has gone up recently. And there's still, I think, 0% on dividends if you're non-domiciled. But maybe you can talk us through that and how it would look for somebody who was coming in with this goal of citizenship.
Absolutely. So a lot of the people going through this pathway will, I suspect, at least in my practice, it's the most common case, will be entrepreneurs. And Cyprus really is one of the only jurisdictions which offers the simplicity that doesn't really exist anywhere else. So when it comes to global tax planning and residency planning, which is actually the core of our business, many of the cases would be building a structure which is spread all across the globe. So you will have a company in one jurisdiction, basically what people call flag theory, right? So company in one jurisdiction, bank account in another, a residency permit in a third, you spend most of your time in a fourth, etc. There are not that many places in the world which are both safe, comfortable, and have a great access to an economic bloc such as the EU, which offer the simplicity of having everything or almost everything in one place and still having almost all the benefits you would otherwise have, like low taxes, easy pathways to citizenship, easy pathways to residency, acceptance of dual nationality, etc. So Cyprus, in that sense, even at its current corporate tax rate of 15%, yes, they have had a 12.5% historically for many, many years, is still a great choice. But there are actual aspects of it that most people who don't get exposed to the practical details never think about. That's why I mentioned entrepreneurs. Most of the entrepreneurial opportunities that people pursue with a company in Cyprus would be in one way or another connected to technology. And with technology, they will develop most likely their own intellectual property, and they will innovate, and they will create somewhat of a pathway to become what Cyprus calls an innovative company. So in that sense, the top line company profit tax will go from 15% all the way to 3%. It used to go from 12.5 to 2.5. Now it's from 15 to 3. Now that has to be facilitated in a proper compliant way. So we help with that. But essentially you have to have presence in Cyprus, which if you want to actually receive your residency permit, you will have, and you will have to innovate in technology, which most likely you will if you're an entrepreneur who opens a company in Cyprus. So if those things combined are handled properly, your bottom line tax with a very reputable nowadays jurisdiction in the EU will be 3% tax. That's unheard of almost all across the world, not to mention in the EU.
Wow, what a great package. When you put it like that, like learning Greek to B1 level does not seem like a problem at all. You know, it's all part of these quite unique benefits that Cyprus is offering. So I have a question about that. In terms of like the company being considered innovative, are there specific criteria from the government that kind of what constitutes that? Or is it quite flexible? How does that work?
There are guidelines, and we have to make our due diligence, and we have to go through the planning process with the client to determine how to package everything and how to approach everything in a way that ensures compliance with that. Absolutely. It's not just a one-click and done process, but it's one that I believe every technological entrepreneur will be able to follow through with.
Do they have to, excuse me, do they have to have any qualifications like a certain level of degree or something specific to the field that they want to open the company in?
That's not one of the criteria. It's actually having everything to do with the intellectual property which you develop within the company.
Okay. So entrepreneurs in the AI space would be a good fit for this?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Plenty of those.
That's what I'm seeing the most of right now, actually. Yes.
So anything else that people should know about the tax situation in Cyprus if they're considering this?
So whichever way you want to package it, whether it's citizenship plus low tax jurisdiction or residency without any concern about time spent in Cyprus, plus again, a very comfortable company tax, etc. Cyprus really offers one of the most unique kind of all-round packages in Europe, almost unprecedented. And one thing to remember is, again, the accession, the anticipated accession of Cyprus into the Schengen zone of the EU within the next, most likely, 1.5 years.
So when that happens, Cyprus will be directly comparable to any other EU country, right? That's the final piece of the puzzle, really. So it can compete with Portugal, with France, with Germany, with some of the more common choices, I suppose, for this sort of second citizenship mission. And I believe it also allows dual citizenship. So that's great, which kind of puts it quite far ahead of Spain. I know Spain's another quite popular one, but there's always this issue of it not really allowing dual citizenship with many countries, including the US and the UK at the moment. But still, a lot of people do try and do this via Spain.
Absolutely. When it comes to Spain, there are a lot of challenges. Spain has tax challenges. Spain has a very big difference between law and interpretation of the law, which in many, many cases, when we look at the global kind of stage and we look at the EU stage, we focus more on the interpretation of the law than the law itself. It's very easy to read the law. It's very easy to go to any AI and kind of see what the law says. But
Mhm.
what people miss when they use those kind of tools is how is it actually applied? When it comes to Spain, just to kind of like summarize that in a bit, many people have gotten their Beckham law, which is somewhat of a tax holiday approved, and
Mhm.
then retroactively, as it finished and as they exited the country, suddenly Spain decides to revoke that and ask them for all the taxes they haven't paid. So, and there are hundreds of those kind of cases. So, knowing the case studies, knowing the percentage of how many people face which problems, and
Mhm.
which lines of business or backgrounds are prone to those kind of occurrences is almost more important than just the letter of the law itself, which doesn't give you a full overview of how things really work.
Absolutely. Like making the videos on this channel, it's all about pointing people in the right directions for them. But I always say, once you've narrowed down a country that you want to go for, then look for a local expert who knows it in depth and in detail, because, that's what you need, because there are lots of traps along the way, and only a local expert can give you insights on those. So,
Absolutely. And even then, when it comes to cross-border taxation and cross-border planning, really, because it's more than taxes, it's also residency, it's also other aspects of your life, even the local experts sometimes can lack the understanding of how a different jurisdiction works and how it combines with the one that they're the experts of. So it really is important to have this umbrella understanding of what goes into the whole mix and how it interacts together, and bringing together the local experts that can actually pick up from the place that the previous expert left and be in the loop in a way that cohesively works. Otherwise, you can kind of have everything, for example, in Spain done correctly, but something you made in Panama just doesn't fit the bill in Spain, and it crushes the whole planning, no matter how good your Spanish local expert made everything sound.
and there's a lot at stake with Spain, because I know that if you're going for eventual citizenship, that's 10 years of waiting, of being a resident. So,
Yeah,
that.
most people I see going for the Spanish options, for the Spanish option, are actually citizens of countries where you could actually get on that pathway within basically 2 years. So that's the big difference. Clients from the Philippines or from
Mhm.
Latin America, so they would be very happy with the Spanish pathway being in 2 years. Otherwise, it's a challenging one.
Do you know if that includes Argentina?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Because there's a new citizenship by investment program for Argentina, I think about to launch, or maybe it has launched, where I think it's like 2 years. It's topic for another video, totally, but could be an interesting.
At the time of our conversation, at least, the program in Argentina hasn't yet been introduced officially. It's in its last stages. We have clients lined up to actually go for it. Argentina is much on the top of the list of many people, and I have
Mhm.
clients who have actually immigrated to Argentina and have gotten themselves citizenship by naturalization there.
Yeah.
What we are not sure about just yet, especially since it's a citizenship by investment program,
Mhm.
is how Spain potentially will look at those citizenships in the application of the 2 year pathway to citizenship there. I have a feeling they will be scrutinizing against those citizenship holders and basically look at their place of birth rather than, yes.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that citizenship by naturalization is treated sometimes as a second class status. I don't believe that should be the case. But then I guess on the flip side of that, there's potential for exploitation as well of these pathways. So
Yes, and
yeah.
let's not forget we're talking about citizenship by investment here. Usually in countries where it's citizenship by naturalization, they might look at it, depends on which actual clerk
Yeah.
looks at your application, but you can get lucky. But when a citizenship by investment program becomes a big thing and everyone rushes to buy in,
Mm.
all of the perks that come with that usually go away quite quickly. We have seen that with the Caribbean countries that
Yeah.
in practice now having one of the Caribbean countries' passports, citizenships by investment, and flying into Europe, you might be denied entry, even though officially they have visa-free access to the EU. So that's one of the reasons many people
I
have
mean,
bought into those
it
programs.
doesn't
But
surprise me,
now
to be honest.
those are not anymore.
But there was this citizenship by investment in Sao Tome, and
Yeah.
That's as an ex-Portuguese colony, there may be shortcuts to Portuguese citizenship by getting that one first. But again, I haven't dug into the technicalities of that and how it's actually viewed by Portugal, which could be a whole can of worms.
Again, which is a question of interpretation versus the law. So nothing in the law prevents you from having the same benefits, but definitely could be interpreted in a way that prevents the benefits of ex colony citizens getting maybe a shorter pathway to citizenship in Portugal, which the law that hasn't yet passed but might in the future talks about. So we don't know where it goes just yet, but it might be scrutinized against. Again, Portugal, knowing how it works, usually I would expect probably will allow you for that benefit. Plus, it's not that big of a difference. It's probably like going to be around 3 years of residency requirement difference between the two.
Yeah, but then you can avoid all of these doubts and issues and just go for Cyprus instead, straight in.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the clearest. Plus, it's an English-speaking country. Let's not forget that. It's an ex-British colony. I don't know a single person in Cyprus, and I've spent countless months in the island, all combined with all the flights there. Lovely people, all English-speaking, super friendly. One of the best places, just like vibe-wise, in the world. I love the people.
I really need to plan a visit at some point. But actually, I'm thinking that there can also be a downside if English is too prevalent, especially if somebody needs to get good at Greek to get B1 level, that could be its own challenge, like Madeira for Portuguese speaking.
Definitely. I think the locals are so proficient in English that they might just want to, communicate instead of becoming your teachers, but they're friendly enough to kind of follow you if you actually insist.
And away
people. Cypriots are just fantastic. And also, since the island attracts so many entrepreneurs and people who do and create and strive for something, and even many young people recently, I feel like it has almost like this somewhat of a European innovation hub feeling. So it's really growing. You can get to meet incredible individuals on the island.
Right, that's it. I'm lining it up for this year on my radar now. Cool. So I think that's a good note to wrap this up. And I can also drop a link in the description with details about how to contact Bogdan. All right, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So there you have it. Cyprus is offering something that's genuinely rare right now, a predictable pathway to EU citizenship after just 4 years of residency, written into law with a processing timeline that other European countries simply can't match. Okay, it's not for everyone. You do need to be a skilled worker or an entrepreneur. You need to be serious about learning Greek, and you do need to be prepared to spend around 120 days a year on the island. But if that fits your situation, then this opportunity is real and it's available right now. If you want to take the next step and explore your options, Bogdan is offering a free 15-minute eligibility call exclusively for Digital Emigres viewers. It's a no-commitment chat to work out whether this pathway makes sense for you specifically, and the link to book that is in the description. If you found this useful, please like the video and subscribe to the Digital Emigre channel for more content on building a successful life outside your country of birth. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.